Hello there everybody. This is going to be another painting demo here. We're back into the Dunkelgrau, although this is for our Soviet campaign. Now I've got some images on the upper left and lower right hand corners of the Flammpanzer. This is the Char B1, obviously a captured French vehicle. And this is from Warlord Games. It's part of their 3 variation set here, and we're going to show you that. So you can build this as a German Flammpanzer as we're doing here, but then there's also, this is another build that I'm also going to do right here. This is going to be the Biat's Char B1. So that's a really fun thing. So there's a little scene here that shows you 3 different builds you can make. You can also make the late war Flammpanzer. But since we're doing a lot of the Barbarossa stuff, we're going to go with this Dunkelgrau. So I'm going to go back to my original scene here, and we're going to go over the materials really quickly here. It's going to be an awful lot of secret weapon paints. They're called weathering paints. I really don't like to refer to them as that because they just do so much more than just weathering. You're going to see a lot of the engine grime color, not so much for engine grime, but actually for the gray. Gonna see some of the liner paints here. This is green liner from Reaper, but you'll also see some of the blue, probably some of the brown. I think we're just gonna have to do the mud in acrylics. So guess what? We got caked dirt and old mud, also from Secret Weapon. In terms of brushes, it's also gonna be pretty simple. We've got the usual craft brushes here. Again, a really nice big old brush that's going to let us do our glazes on this right quick. We've got some makeup brushes for some blending, and then we've got the craft brushes. Again, the newer ones that are more pristine tend to have a nice pointy tip, and when you get to the ones that have a little more wear and tear, a little more use on them, then you start to see something like this, or I'd say basically a homemade filbert brush. Also adept at blending on flat surfaces. And these, I usually get them at Hobby Lobby. This is the latest set that I just got here. You got 12 of them in here. Again, you can see how nice and pointed they are when they are brand new. And when I got some other materials here. We've got our makeup sponges, this sort of thing. So we're going to use this for removing some of those washes and glazes. We're going to get to that next. We're going to get to some initial darkening and some tinting of this Dunkelgrau. So utilizing some of our bigger brushes here, I've got some gray liner here, engine grime here, some of that tire black here. The tire black gives me a chance to put a little more blue into this Dunkelgrau. The engine grime is sort of a neutral gray, and the gray liner that almost has a little bit of a reddish tone to it. So the idea here is to vary those grays as much as possible. Now I'm going to start off with the turret here real quick. Got our homemade filbert brush, and we're going to get out some water here. We're going to draw some of these paints out. As most folks who watch a lot of these videos know, I enjoy the liners from Reaper, the clears from Reaper, and these secret weapon paints because their formulation lets you do stuff like this, where I'm just taking all kinds of water, tons of water, thinning these suckers down. So you can see a little bit of reddish, kind of a neutral gray here, and then a little towards the blue. It's subtle, doesn't show up a lot, but this was pre-shaded with the Badger Steino Res primers. Let's get this in a good spot for you. We're going to start working from the top down. We're going to vary this. See, I just grabbed a little bit of that gray liner. Start at the top down and let gravity do some of the work. Gravity and some of the sponges. Especially with the Dunkelgrau, it is supposed to sort of be a dark bluish gray or darkish bluish gray. You can see already how, since this is thinned down a little bit, it is going to take on some of the pre-shading that we did. So we got all this on here while it is still wet. A couple of ways I can remove paint. We got our sponges here, so we can go like this. You can see how we're removing some of those washes here. Some, but not all. When we get to this, in some ways we even have a little bit of streaking that's by default. Now, instead of trying to push that, we can add obviously rush streaks and other dirt streaks and rain streaks later on. But when you're in this initial stage, let's try another way of removing. So see if we can do it like so. And if I scumble a little bit, see how there's almost a little bit of texture that's happening here, like the paint maybe is pitted a little bit. So you can, so a lot of different ways of removing paint. See, look, we can do this. See how that sort of creates a streak right there. And what we can do is then work even more with that streak later. So we've got our turret there, and what it does, see how it's a wee bit darker than the hull. So we'll set this off to the side. Now we're going to grab the bigger brush. I'm going to wet this baby down. I'm going to get into our paints here, water some of these down a little more. This palette is fairly simple. It is this from Strathmore palette paper. This is a 9x12 size. I think it comes in 40 sheets. You get larger ones, smaller ones, some with more sheets. So once again, we have to think in terms of gravity here. But I also have to think, all right, I'm only going to go up to our tracks here with this initial. I don't want to do this and all this and have it sort of half dry and that sort of thing. So see, I'm just going to use that as a natural stopping point right there. But you're also going to see that we're going to vary these colors. I'm in the gray liner here at this point. Just going to go over the, that's going to go right over the exhaust here, because we'll put our rust and other textures on that later. You can see here, I don't want to forget about our tire black. Get that in on the turret ring. And see, I just vary this color from place to place. Now, as the German version, you've got more, I don't want to say stowage, but you've got more gear, more Pioneer tools than, say, the French version. Tend to have a little less of that. So just, you can see we're not really worried about the lines, so to speak. We're going to work our way down here. Again, we're going to stop along here, work down to the front of this hull. And for those that some folks ask what I have, you can see that blue tack there. Well, that's what it is. That is what I use to attach the vehicles to these jars of paint or whatever it is I'm going to use to hold them on there. It's pretty effective. So here we go. Making sure we're not spending too much time letting things dry out. And we have our sponge. We remove paint. And I'm not necessarily going to do it cleanly, because take a look at our photos in the corners, you know, that streaking and irregularity to the colors. Well, that gives us just a added touch of interest, realism, whatever it is you want to call it. Now, let's say gets a little too dirty. Snip that away. We're back to some clean sponge. And take some of this away. Remember, you can always add more. Where's our smaller sponges? We've got these maybe for areas that are, so it takes that paint away a little bit tighter. Or we can use this brush, we dry it off, you can take some away. So it just lets you get into different areas maybe that are harder, easier to reach. And this does not have to be perfect, because remember, rust effects, dirt effects. Gonna have some leaves on here, because this is supposed to be summer after all. You can see I'm not really getting too crazy about this, just moving the paint around. Grab a new sponge if I want to. Sometimes the more washes and more liquid the paint is, you might have to change the sponge more frequently or cut away the used portion more often. I want to make sure I don't pull off any antennas also. So I'll just be satisfied with that. I'm going to go back to the colors here. We're going to pick a side, any side, right in here, and we're going to start at the top. And at this point, it's not going to be quite as watered down. And you can see I'm maybe going to take advantage of, see how I made that a little bit darker? That's also the gray liner. Now what we're going to do is get some of this paint out of here. I'm going to squeegee some of that out. Looks like it's in a good spot for you. And then we're just going to do this. Just gonna see and take some of that away. See how it's creating a bit of natural. Take some of this away. The sponge. So we're starting to, by default again, get some of this natural streaking. So we've got the radiator grill right here. So this is almost straight up gray liner, watered down now, then back to streaking grime. And take some of that away. You can see what the advantage, the big brush here, just I can see some of the paint I'm squeegeeing out of there. Drag it down. Compare it to this side here. Over this the sprocket here. I can use my finger if I want. Do the same thing on this side. Again, I can just use that, wipe stuff away. I'm going to do a video on each of the versions of this boxed set, because like I said, from my early work, I'll bring it out and show you how that looks in its beginning stages. So that's going to be for, obviously, for Battle of Stone, because it's going to be Captured Char B. Hopefully that's the way you pronounce his name, but you can see what we're doing here. We're getting some darks down into these crevices, but also thinking about some of the streaking parts of this. Now remember my makeup brush here. Try and dry some of that off. Down we go. Here's again. But because the paint is still wet, see, look at all these irregularities and variations here over the side door. That happens because, in a way, we're letting the paint do its own thing. See, I just turn the brush on its side. You do have to be mindful of watermarks when you're taking paint away. See, as I take this away here, now you've got a puddle of water there. Now, not the end of the world that there's a watermark there because, well, we're trying to make streaks down the side of this thing, aren't we? See, now that this is drying, you can see even a little bit more of the streaks there. What we're going to do is let that dry. We're going to go back to our turret here. Now, what I can do is go back to my filbert style brush. Well, let's say we take something that's a little bit lighter here. So I've got, these are things I like to use as white. This is from Reaper. This here I just consider a bluish white, and this I consider a reddish white. Let's grab this bluish white, and while I still have my original 3 grays out on the palette, what I'm going to do is maybe mix up some lighter versions. So this is going to be more of an opaque thing, but see, I've got that set up more like a filbert brush there. I'm trying to get this where you can see it. So see how I'm just going to right over the top. And if I feel it's too late, well, guess what? I have all that gray. It's still there. So we're adding even a little more streaking to that in a way. Can do the same thing here. Same thing over here. So it's by just the motion of the brush. Do that. Here's it. Now it gets a little lighter. Can even get rid of some of that paint. And you can make this as smooth or as rough or as weathered as you see fit. You can see that in the reference pictures that I've got, yeah, this is fairly weathered. When I did some research on it, the concept behind the Dunkelgrau was that as the vehicle moves through its environment, in many ways it would take on the color of its environment. So it would sort of camouflage itself. Works, really, I would suppose, until it starts to rain a lot, and then a lot of your acquired camouflage is washed away, potentially. See how that just turns into a filbert brush, and I can scumble this along here. So this is not oils. I love my oils, but this has to be dry just in a matter of hours because it's needed. It's going to be brought somewhere and used in a game. So that means accelerating the process a little bit and using acrylics. So I got my sharper brush and go here and work on the details of that hatch. Not going to make that too bright. Just enough indication something's there. Do the same thing on this side. There's, as you can see, as far as the markings on this go, there's not a whole lot in the way of decals. I've got those cut out. I'll put those on. I don't think I'm going to do that on camera because I usually use colorful metaphors when I'm working with decals, and don't want to have those phrases on the YouTube channel, so we'll do the decals off camera and we'll weather those a bit so you can see that. So here we go. Now it's got, so you can see here we've got ourselves some nice coloration on that. Now that was using the bluish white. So let's try that Maiden Flash for more of a reddish tone to our grays. And it's going to give us a little different look. I think I've got this where you can see it. So it's a little bit lighter. It's too light, remember. I can just knock that down, add a little gray to it. And now this makes that gray a bit more of a warm. It's going to give us some variance here. I'm taking a little more of that Maiden Flash. And again, I've got the Filbert style brush working here, spread way out. I can still even use my finger to blend at this point. Do that all the time. We'll work here on our coax, machine gun. Looks like some stowage mounts there. Again, you can just get rid of some paint sometimes. And let's get to our main hull here. Most of, say, these lighter colors, we'll focus those more on the top. On the back deck here. So see, if it got a little too light, well, can almost use sort of a middle tone, darken that down. But I'm also trying to leave a little variance here. So here we're going to take this warmer, lighter red. I think this is where you can see it, and see there. See, we're just going to essentially kind of blend that together a little bit. We'll do it here. But it's not equally everywhere. So I love the Filbert brush effect here. Makes it easier to, looks like I got that one. Good spot. Then just drag this down. Start to create a little more light and dark, a little more differential there. Do the same thing here. Same thing here. Now this obviously being the type of essentially pre-war tank, you got more with the rivets, and it's a little more faceted than obviously some of the late war tanks that had the cast armor or your rolled steel that was welded together. I think this was just kind of an odd conglomeration of just about everything. I think there was a little bit of welding, there was some riveting, there was even the track system, much more of a World War I feel to it. But after watching some video of this at the Tank Fest at Bovington, just, I don't know, a matter of weeks ago, maybe it was because this was kind of a narrow vehicle overall. It was moving around, it was nimble, I was surprised what it could do. So I'm going to bounce back and forth. I grabbed a little bit more of the bluish light. So now we're starting to accentuate the difference between that top surface. And as I always say, I think I say it on even just regular miniatures now too, but especially with things like vehicles, when you want to do the weathering and that sort of effect, you have to think of it like a game of chess. You have to plan ahead, and I'm trying to do that now as I do these. I don't want a lot of light colors here because I actually want that to be where my rust slash oxidation is. So I'm not going to focus a lot on lightening this up. So that's not going to be as light as what we've got here. Also, the other reason for keeping things a bit lighter is it's easier to show the darker streaking. It's easier to show that chipping that everybody loves so much. Yeah. Everybody loves to see chipping on the tank. Well, not everybody does. Some people get a little anxiety about that, but hey, it's your vehicle. You do whatever the heck you want to it. Especially if the battlefields that it's going to be on, which in our case is Pripyat marshes, that means a bit of a moist setting that it's working in, and that means maybe a little more mud spatter, a little more rust, some more streaking, that sort of thing. So I don't get too crazy with the initial gray here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my grays, and then we'll pause this instead of just kind of continuing on. I realized it's the one advantage of not doing a live stream is that I can sort of stop the camera and reset things a little bit and move on to the next phase instead of just blasting right through. So again, using the off-white of different varieties, just creating some difference in these panels, thinking that there's going to be rust in here, there's going to be dirt on the top of this, maybe even some footprints or whatever from the tank crew walking around on top of this thing. That's the more, when I watch some of the tank videos where they walk around restored tanks and that sort of thing at the different museums, and I notice just how much to maintain this thing or even to work this vehicle, you're not just doing stuff inside. There's a lot of exterior things that happen. So you're just taking this, moving along, so we don't want to get that too much lighter because, hey, sides. Don't want to forget about the sides, and we've still got our initial gray colors out here. And I think we've got that in a good place for it, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to run this down, make it lighter in some places. I think here's a good spot for that. Boom, like so. So this is not dry brushing. There's plenty of paint on here. It's a brush stroke that I basically call it. It's a feathered brush stroke. There's plenty of paint. It's actually very watery. You can kind of see that. And you would almost, as you see this, think that I've got some oil paints going here, because look at how it seems to be wet blending, but it's really not actually. It's just that's the advantage of it not being this the classic dry brush in that sense of the word. So let's warm things up here. This is a little bit lighter also. And I have to think, so do I want this lighter, or is that going to be more either chipped or dirty? What's that going to be? And even at this stage, I could wipe away some of this paint too that's being added. So here I'm trying to catch some of these rivets. So what we've done is take our initial washes and kind of expanding on those a bit. So going back to that gray, once again, gonna go down here. Again, find places for some lights and darks, for some streaking, even if I gotta use my hand. And what I do here, this is by no means even the final gray. I can always put more. I can lighten something up. I can darken it. You can always make adjustments. I think that's why I try to encourage working this way, because we haven't invested a whole bunch of time in any one area here. So if you're going to make a change, you're not going to worry, oh boy, I just spent 3 hours painting this one thing. If I have a false move or something happens, oh my gosh, I just lost all this work that I did. Yeah, not so much. There again, the filbert style, plenty of paint on the brush, and we just start to drag that down. If it's not got enough moisture, add a little bit of moisture to it. See how that all of a sudden now it flows a little better. So this is a way to make an otherwise really boring Dunkelgrau vehicle have just something a little more than just gray. Advantage of the filbert is I can take it this way. If I go this way with it, now I can basically almost catch a few little quick highlights there. That's really fun. Turn it around, do the same thing on this side. So that gives you a fairly good idea of what we're going to do with our gray. Again, on this top surface, what I like to do sometimes to show a bit of wear and tear, especially around turret rings. Boy, that's really a place where I like to make some textures. Now I'm going to do this. It's scumble this in here. Just going to scumble that in. We're going to do the same thing with the rust in a bit, or at least our weathering type colors, so to speak. So there you have it. Let's say, okay, I don't like that. That's just too light. Doesn't matter to me. It's okay either way. I can tone that down, make an adjustment. Or if I like it, I bring it back. So even with acrylics, there's a way to, make a little bit of an adjustment here and there. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to let this dry a little bit here. Then we'll start to work on some of the more of the rust colors in that phase. So it's time to move on to some of those weathering effects, rust, whatever you want to call it. We've got some of the usual suspects out here. The brown liner, And then some of the secret weapon colors, old rust, red rust. We even have, I think, an orange rust here. Yep. So those are on this little mini palette here. It's basically just a blister pack. And we're going to thin this down. And what we're going to do is to start off, make a bit of, essentially it's called Trax wash or Trax rust or something like that. Basically that kind of oxidation that happens on your tracks. So that's a brown liner, mostly the brown liner and old rust together. Makes kind of a nice reddish brown, but see it's sort of a liquidy type thing here. And I'm going to pop this in here where my tracks are. See if you can, yeah, you can. Right now it just sort of looks wet. But I think maybe there you can see a difference. That's a little bit darker also. And just like before, we can remove a little bit of that. Let's hear it now. The reason I like to do this, it makes the tracks have a little bit of color, little variation, but it makes those darker, which means that things like dried mud, dust, dirt, whatever, those by default are going to show up a bit more because, well, light against dark is always gonna show up more. Now here on our, yeah, that's a good, now you really see the difference that makes. So you can see just how much we've lightened some of these panels here on the top deck. And I do have to say it is a little bit easier getting at these tracks than, well, say the Tilda and some of the other vehicles I've had to paint, so that's fun. And I don't really care if I hit things, whatever. Hey, I can take it and just streak it right down. Or I can water down a sponge a little bit and just get rid of it. It's a vehicle. You know, it's the whole idea of this is to add, we're adding weathering to it. So let's get some more of this. Again, the Trax wash, I'll just call it that for now. Run this over some of these surfaces here. And I apologize in advance if sometimes this is in a bad position for you to see it. There's times where I just gotta be able to see it myself. Minor details. Minor details. Just like I did, not to quite the degree with the gray, but you can see that sometimes there's a little more of the brown liner. Sometimes there's a little more of the, and sometimes sneak in a little bit of the orange rust. Not worried about the whole chipping thing yet. That's kind of integrated into this stage. So again, the big difference this is going to make. This is why I didn't bother masking off this carefully at all, because I knew I was going to be doing this. Because for me, the priming / pre-paint or pre-shading phase, however you'd like to term that, it's not about a finished result. That's why I don't bother with all the careful masking. I know I'm going to be painting over it anyways. So again, a little more towards the red. And now we are fairly good to go there. Let's start to add some rust and some other effects on our back deck. Now I'm going to just pick a spot, and And if it's not watered down again, like I said, secret weapon paints, they are designed to be used nice and wet. And every so often, now I'm going to start to sneak in a little bit of that more orange type rust. But I'm also going to have a little pool. And to me, this is really fun when you have a nice big open area like this with lots of different things going on. So, and we've got our fabulous sponge here. Take some away, and instead of necessarily just wiping it away, so I'm kind of scrubbing away, pulling, and almost intentionally leaving some uneven areas here. Trying to think, well, okay, there wouldn't be a lot of the oxidation there, but you know, as we get to the sides of these panels, there would be some more there. Let's work our way here. You can see I'm kind of marching my way towards the turret ring where I know I want a whole bunch more in the way of weathering. So I can also do this. I basically took some of the paint off the brush. Let's see how that takes that away. Even a little pre-rust streaking there. See how the brush is all kind of falling apart like that now. Look at what I can do here. Remember that scumbling technique I was telling you about? See how it's nice and subtle there? Nice and subtle. We get it loaded up with some water again. And again, it's nothing that says I can't go back over this with some gray. If I feel like there's just too much rust or it's too dark, can always go back over it again. So take away some of this and just almost, in effect, mop up some of that color with the brush. It's getting a little bit ahead of things here, but I just want to show you while I've got some of this. So this is some of the orange rust here, red rust, sorry. While this is still wet. So what I just did there is I dropped a few little, while that's wet, if you pop in, so I'm going to make myself another little vat of, yeah. It's something I like to play with. If you watch from Justin from Secret Weapon, he has his 2-minute tutorial things. You'll see him doing a similar type thing, this sort of a watercolor type action. I'm a watercolorist by trade, so, and training, I guess you would call it that. So that really appealed to me when I saw it. So again, you can see I just mop and pull some of that away. We've got these spare Trax links here. Don't want to forget those. Add a little bit of water here to make this all flow. So again, if this is not in the most ideal position for you to see, I apologize for that, but if I can't see it, not a whole lot's going to happen. So here, more of the brown liner, just to not so much a rust streak, but just a few dark streaks there. Alright, on that surface. Move over here to some of the other kit that's on this side, and a little bit of brown liner. I'm just trying to get some darks shoved underneath there and remove some of it with this here sponge. So let's put out, again, this is the old rust. Put some more of this out here. Don't need tons of it. Looks like I've got, yeah, got enough of the red here. I'm going to throw some of the brown liner back out. Yeah, I think I want a little more of the old rust. Yep, that's good. Water this stuff down again, get a little mix of this underway. So let's play with right here and play with this. The exhaust. Something like this is pretty fun because usually the exhaust is either kind of semi under the vehicle or partially hidden by the back deck or by something. So this is fun. While this is still wet, what we're going to do is start to add some of the red rust in places, not everywhere, but in some. And I know this drives some people crazy. We're just going to actually let the paint do its thing. We are not going to go in there and... So I'm just going to drop a few blobs of this and we're just going to let it mix. Just going to let that mix together. Then it's going to get even more scary because we're going to take the orange rust here, the much lighter rust color. Yep. And I think you guessed what we're going to do. You're also going to drop some of that in there and allow it to mix on its own. We're not going to totally take charge of how that's going to blend itself together. We're going to let it do that by itself. Now, sometimes that is just, and sometimes I'm putting a little more water in here just so that it does some more blending on its own and some fun things. You can see just how much liquid is in here. Sometimes, okay, I can go back and pop some of the red rust on there. This is a little more, you just see it more, it shows it more, but let's start to put some of this now in other areas. Again, a favorite of mine is always turret rings. To me, that just gets so much rotation. It's being scraped away. I always like to give that some nice rust. Same thing I did on the turret ring, but or on the exhaust section, but not quite to that same degree. You can see here I have these little puddles of what just looks like dirty water. Well, they sort of are, but to me they're like little weathering reservoirs. So see what we're going to do here. See how that brush has just all become blah. Yeah, that's just perfect for what we need here then. Let's get this right along. There's a little bit of stippling here. Maybe not chipping. Maybe it's just a little bit of rust settling into where some paint's been knocked away. Who knows? And I'm really charging through this here. We're just blasting through that. You can obviously do this at your own pace. You don't have to keep up with me here. In some ways, that's why I'm trying to make these recorded videos, because in the live sessions, it can happen kind of fast. And sometimes people say, whoa, what just happened there? And I don't always have the time to necessarily repeat what I did. So we'll get some metals for these Pioneer tools. And if I, just like I said before, if some stippling in some areas is not quite what I want, I can always go back and affect some changes. So I'm trying to do is play off of what I've done on the exhaust system. See how that's darkened itself down there now? That's why I wanted to kind of emphasize no need to panic. See, I'm going to take some of that and effectively make some darker streaks out of it. Haven't messed with the sides of the hull yet. Not going to do that just yet. Don't want to get too far ahead of things. That's what's fun about the Dunkelgrau scheme is that, well, rust and mud and all those things, they tend to show up well because they're more of a warm color type thing, and well, obviously it's going to show up more against the kind of neutral gray bit more. So let's just get this to do some streaking here. I'm going to probably add in maybe a touch of gray, but boy, there's a lot of mud that's going to be back here. So guess what? I'm not really going to sweat that too much. See, I can just put some down, some lights, take some stuff away. And we can try and incorporate a little more of the rust over here. There's a few rivets there, a few rivets here. Obviously our track links. So let's, speaking of tracks, let's hit these top links. Every so often, I don't want it to be uniform here. And just a little bit. See how watered down this gets. No, it is, well, let it water it down and let it do its own thing. Sometimes the more control you try to exert over it, the less natural it's gonna look. It's gonna look like it was controlled, like somehow magically rust was just placed in this one key area. And just like we did on our exhaust, we're gonna do a little bit of rust streaks here. Why not? Put some on these tanks. It's fun. Geez. The first Char B that I painted, well, actually it was a Flames of War Char B, but the first bolt action sized, that was the metal / resin kit. And it was one of the first vehicles I'd ever painted, so that was an interesting, a new experience. It's interesting to revisit it again, but in the Dunkelgrau, of which I have painted so much now, done a whole early war German army. These are obviously meant to be used for games. Right here on this same YouTube channel, you can check those out. Actually, I just last week put up the latest video battle report. Let's compare this to our turret. And see, we definitely have ourselves some fun little rust things going on. Now I've been using the beat up brush. Let's grab something that's a little more on the pristine side here. Maybe focus in on a few smaller areas. I might even brighten up this rust color a bit. Get this, I think you can see that. So I'm just gonna few, not every single one, but a few. And see here, I'm gonna try and drop down. I think when people see the approach, it looks super chaotic. Yes, it's chaotic, but it's controlled. There is a rhyme to that reason. Then I'm gonna take this, poof, take some of that away. So yes, there is some measure of control exerted over this. So just find some of these rivets. Pull out some of those. Yeah, here on these track links, at first I couldn't figure out why the track links on vehicles were always so rusted. At first in my mind, I just thought, well, wait a minute, they're not making all this contact with the ground and everything else. Well, they're not, but they're not making any contact with the ground, so therefore they're just going to sit there and rust. So I've actually purposely really chopped up that brush. See what we're starting to do here, just stippling away a little bit and then push some of that around. It's really fun to do this in oils. Again, I miss being able to do these in oils. I think what I will do is do the Biot French tank. I'll do that one in oils. And just without even thinking about it, I've started to dabble into some chipping here. Sorry that I just sort of grabbed my brush here and started to go at that. There's other ways of doing that. I've got my, somewhere over here, a special stippling brush that I made just for that. Got that. There's also some other things. Green Stuff World has these sponges. Oh, and then there's regular sponges. So let's try the Green Stuff World sponge. It's really nice. I like it. And the thing is that it gives me something to hang on to here. I can almost use it more like a brush, which is neat. And then when this is kind of exhausted, I want to cut this stuff off. I just kind of yank it out of this tube a little bit, expose just enough to get some paint on it, and that's it. So see, we've done a little pre-chipping kind of stuff there. And we focused a lot on the top surface here. Let's work on the sides a bit. Yeah, where's my red rust and now my old rust? Let's do, now I'm going to use the finer point for this. I want this to be a little more control. We got all these little rivets here we're going to try and show off. Yeah, without getting, don't want this thing to be like it's just sat still for a month just collecting rainwater. So what I'm going to do is that. I'm going to grab myself another brush here, and almost as if it was oils, guess what? Just gonna pull some of that down. It's obviously, I suppose, much easier to do it in the oils because you have lots of time to come back in here with the brush and streak things down because it's just not going to dry so fast. So here we'll get a little teensy bit of rust going here on this door. I suppose too, when it comes to thinking about the weathering on this, it's only been essentially recently captured and turned into German service. However, it's also had to take a long journey here by train, whatever, to get to this Pripyat Marsh front. So it's legitimate to have some decent weathering on it, that's for sure. So again, I'm just gonna pick out a few rivets here. Now I'm gonna make this a little more watery. Just want to get some of this down into these crevices here. And once more, I don't want to have streaks on the drive wheel. I'm going to do this. I'm going to focus that's what I want to do in the center. Almost have it radiating outwards. You can see what I've got here. I've got some more intense rust color here, taking the yellow and orange rust, mixing that together. And I'm gonna go back here to our, and take some of that away. And again, if it's too intense, I can always water it down. See, I just watered all that stuff down. There's gonna be so much mud and such over the top of that. I don't want to get too involved with it. It has to be there because you do have to layer your weathering effects. The rust would not really be on top of the mud. That doesn't make much sense. It's all involved with that chess match, that pre-planning, what it is you're trying to do with your weathering, how you're trying to set the environment for this vehicle. I also am in some ways pushed by the direction the rest of the other vehicles are, so I do have a fair amount of rust and dirt and such on the other Dunkelgrau vehicles that are in my Eastern Front Barbarossa force. So I'm trying to keep some consistency, a little cohesiveness there too. So sometimes I really water the heck out of this and just take my sponge and poof, hit that. Let's get some fresh orange rust out there. And nope, that's red rust, sorry. I always get these mixed up. There is a yellow rust. What the heck? Put some out there. I keep talking about it. I'm going to put it out there. May not use it. And I may use it. We'll see. Couple of rivets. And I guess for you rivet counters, there you go. There's rivets. I try to research things as much as I can. Now, the benefit I had here was Warlord had done some of the research for me. So I think you can see some of the markings on this vehicle. The decals are in the kit. There's French decals, early war, late war. You have early, mid, and late war German decals. I mean, far be it from me to be excited about decal sheets and rave about that, but I have to say, I made life potentially a little bit easier for me. So I'm going into some of the lighter rust colors here. This is kind of that fun stage where you've set the tone for things, and now we can choose little details. See in here, this is, maybe this is, I'm going to water this down so that it actually flows down in the crevices. You have to do that more with the acrylics, say, than you would with the oils, but see now that's going to flow down into that crevice a little better. I want to go nuts and do it absolutely everywhere. I'm going to take this. What I'm going to try and do is continue that down here. So intentionally thinking, okay, this is sort of a rain spout here. You know, where would water just kind of gather, and where would water also be running constantly? You know, potential, I guess, traps for the water. So that's gonna, I'm gonna finish up some of this because at this point it's starting to repeat things. And what I'll do is I'm gonna do some of this on the turret itself. Actually, no, we'll do that now. So I'm gonna stop here before I get too involved, because we got to get caught up on this turret, which has nothing on it. So I'm going to backtrack here. We're going to need some of our brown liner. I think we got all the rest of our rust colors just fine. And make sure I water these things down enough. I want to make sure I get some decent. I'm just kind of shoving this down into the underside of the turret, just some places where it's naturally going to be more rusted up. So I got our mantlet here. That's got a little bit of rusting on it. And as like I said before, I can probably go back over this with some gray. Now around the, I think this is still the original French hatch here. Eventually the Germans kind of tried to dispense with that and make something that was something a little more usable. Just like I did on the turret ring, a little less battering on this, but it's a place where water would kind of collect over this very, very tiny cupola here. See a few rust streaks here and there. Thinking, where would it come from? Generally these, good source. Get out my brown liner once again. And where did my, here it is, my little thing here from Green Stuff World. We're gonna do some of this. a little bit of tiny bit of dancing here along the lead edges of the turret, especially the cast turret like this. It's can sometimes be a tricky place to locate your chipping. Now eventually I've got the chipping medium. I think I actually have both the Vallejo and the MiG ammo version. I really want to try that stuff. I've got some Soviet tanks that are all set up for that. Just haven't had a chance to try it yet. Because the thing about the chipping medium that this can't do is this is still painted on. It has no physical dimension. Whereas the chipping medium, you are creating tiny physical chips in the paint. So hey, pretty neat. So that's adequate for our purpose right here. Kind of does the trick. Well, maybe while we got it, do a few shots here along the edges of things, especially leading edges of things. Maybe here around the door. Makes sense to have it there. I try to think, well, why is there chipping here? Well, certainly here along this turret ring. Certainly here along these leading surfaces, leading edges like this. And I'd love to be able to take 10 hours and spend it on this vehicle. I don't have 10 hours because in less than 10 hours from now, actually in about 9 hours, it's going to actually be used in a game. So you can see why we're sort of accelerating the timeline on this. So we've got our turret. Now we've got some stuff going on here. So what we're gonna do is potentially even throw in some decals real quick and then get to some of the mud and other effects. So let's have a quick conversation about the decals. It's usually not my favorite part of any vehicle, but remember I was talking about those decal sheets. I don't know how much you can see of this. I think if I hold it this way, you can see some of those white markings. A lot of French marking, not just the platoon symbols and company symbols, but even here down to Biot's tank, the Yore name. I think it's had cut out the German decals, which I is using here on the turret. And on the vehicle itself, I may still paint maybe a air recognition symbol on here, maybe just drop a flag on that, whatever. That's something I'll do probably at a later date. And we had got things like this, little scissors for chopping around these because they're pretty crowded down there, and tweezers tends to help. And a little thing of water here with decals, several kinds of decal setting. So this is a micro set. There's also I think I've got them here. And these are from, I think, Vallejo. So the decal medium, that actually will, see, it's alcohol based. It semi melts the decals. You can get them over rivets, that sort of thing, or over rounded areas. And the decal fix is not like the micro set. So there's micro sol. It's a red label. That does kind of the same thing. And the micro set, obviously the blue label. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to get the decals out of harm's way, because water will definitely destroy them. I found that out the hard way. You don't want to also find out the hard way. Now, I'm pushing again the envelope here a little bit, but I want to get these decals not looking like they just were applied. So what I'm going to do is take some of my gray, some of my lighter color here. So I got my choppy brush, and see here, and just tap, tap, tap over the top of this. I'm even taking some of the paint away. But now it doesn't look quite so fresh. Even before you do the rust or whatever effects, it just starts to tone these things down a little bit. Makes them a little less bright and shiny. And in some cases, if you go a little bit even darker over this, it's almost like it's been chipped away, because we talk about the chipping stuff. So see here where there's a streak there. I can go even a little bit more with this. And I don't want to wipe it away completely. So I know some advocate, you can't do this. You can't put decals on until, or you put the weathering on after all the decals, and you varnish and all this other stuff. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, I need to do this a little bit quicker. Don't have quite as much time to do that. It has to happen a little bit faster. But also, I've got a system that this works just fine for me. It may not be what you want to do, and that's fine too. There's no big deal. So I'm just going in here, toning some things down. Just gonna go right over the top. You can still see the number just fine. Even on camera, it probably looks like I hardly really done anything to it, but when you see it in the flesh, it definitely is toned down. It's toned down. It's almost chipped away in some places. So that's your quick review, kind of taking care of those decals. So the next thing I'm going to do here is deal with the mud. So we got the old mud, the cake dirt. I'm going to actually grab some weathering powders, and I'm going to show you how to do kind of a quick dry mud process here. So we'll get to that in a second. So with the decals knocked down a little bit, I'm going to get into some of our dust and mud and dirt effects and all that. I've got a variety of products out here. We've got some weathering powders from MIG and from Secret Weapon. We've got some of our Secret Weapon paints. May or may not get into the pigment fixer. You don't need it quite as much when you're mixing the weathering powders with paint, the way I'm going to do. So we'll keep it handy. Let's see what we're going to do. I just got another little thing here to sort of mix some stuff in. So let's get to this here. Now generally, when you're doing the mud stuff, you want to start with something that's a little bit lighter. So we're going to start with some lighter colors of the Secret Weapon. This is another favorite of mine, this green earth here. We'll put some of this out. Just get some of that out here. And this is some of the little touch of this yellow, because again, the Russian sort of tended to be a little bit more on the yellowy side. So we've got powder sitting here. Let's get some of this old mud. Now, usually mud is lighter where it's drier. So I'm going to set up myself a few barriers here so that I don't affect anything adversely that's around the work area here. So pardon me while I reach over there and do that. And I'm going to change the focus on the camera here. So I'm going to set that down. And we'll get that focused in for you. Let's see if we can even zoom in a bit. All right. What I'm going to do is take some of the paint here. Oops, I want some of my Russian earth. Where is that? Here we go. Forgot some of that. So that's going to be some of my darker mud here. So I've got a range of mud colors, but I've got this lighter mud right here. See how this is starting to kind of coagulate here? A tiny bit of that red. Even throw some more of the old mud out here. Now normally, you take oil paint and plaster sort of and mix that together. Well, we're kind of doing that just with acrylics because it's going to dry faster. But you can see how this starts to have a little bit of a get a bit of a body to it. And it's got some thickness now. I'm going to throw a little more of my green earth into this. So we didn't want quite that much, but that's okay. I'm going to use a little bit of water to make the whole thing. That's what we're talking about now. See that? Oops, gotta hold it a little further away. Alright, let's get some of this onto our vehicle now. And this is what I like about actually doing the water-based stuff here, because I can just kind of move this around. And got a sponge here. See, I can push this around. Even sort of dab away at it here with the sponge a little bit. But you can see how it's starting to cake onto this axle a little bit here. Because that's what we're after, is a little bit of that caked mud effect. Here we can really have some big old blobs of that stuff there. See, look at that. Big old blobs of it. Now I'm going to go here to the aft section of the Flammpanzer. Got that big old chunk there. That's just perfect to have right there. But I also like to sometimes take some of just the weathering powder itself. A little bit of the weathering powder itself and go over the top of that. See, now there's a little bit less of it. Not quite as intense. We can do our mud spatters too, but for obvious reasons we want to focus in on our tracks here. I don't want to wipe out all of my rust color, so I'm just kind of dabbing it over the tracks. I'm going to have some of it kind of collect in here and under the fender there. Have some of it here. And again, not entirely on every single tread or track piece. And I'm going to get myself some more the old mud out here and mix myself up some more of this. Nice mixture here. Again, look at how that's not the oil stuff, that's just some homemade acrylic mud so that this can be safely transported tomorrow. You can see now we're starting to get some of this piled up here. We're gonna get some into here in our a little bit on our sprocket wheel there. So I have to think, okay, where's the spatter gonna go, and where is? So this is supposed to be the lighter, drier mud. So let me make sure I get some of this light color in here. There we go. It's a nice paste. Whoops. So I'm gonna change my focus again here. That's a little better. Because I think you've seen the mix now. You know how that's going to work. Like I said before, I don't want to completely annihilate what I did on the tracks. And as this dries, this is the other thing you've got to factor in. As this dries, it gets lighter. So now see I'm feathering this out a little bit. It's not quite so heavy. It's a little bit of a lighter application here. A little bit lighter. Not so heavy. And look at that nice big old chunk of mud that we can have poof right here. See, I can just sort of scrape some of that onto that fender piece there. And again, where I want it to be lighter. And I've got a little bit less on the brush. That's better. Who knows, maybe even a little bit here. Guess what? I like to also have some on the top deck, especially where, guess what, people might be walking around on the deck. Can wipe some of that away, but it gives one more color here to the deck. One more tone. Let's get back to our mud. Don't forget that. So see, we got all these really nifty clumps of mud here. Now let's make sure we continue that. See, look, I'm just gonna scrape that right onto there. It's irregular. You can see how much lighter that is where that's drying. But the nifty thing is, we haven't used that pigment fixer yet. So if we wanted to, we could, in theory, actually wash all of this stuff away. If you really didn't like it, you could say, that's just not what I wanted. I want something different. You can make that change. With oils, it'd be a little bit tougher. A little tougher to do that. So I'm going to take actually a different brush here. This is that, right, and I'm going to scumble away at some of this. I might even use this. So I'm going to use this. See how that's actually taking some of that away. Let's do some over here. So I realize this is really, really alien and different from what you're probably used to, but it's this system that I kind of had to develop for myself. And then was that necessity is the mother of invention. And sometimes I needed to come up with my own techniques and methods. Okay, that's good enough. Let's not get too crazy with the placement of this mud. Do a little bit more here. So now that gives it, again, another texture, another color. Spritz a little more there. Now I'm gonna shift the focus here again. Let's do, because I need to spatter this, and it's gonna be really hard to spatter that and hold it at the same time. So again, using this guy here, what we do is we water some of this down. We'll give it even more water. And now I'm going to do some test spatter here. Oh yeah, see how that spatters there? And we're going to try and direct it like so. I'm going to give ourselves some spatter over here. I'm going to do a few isolated ones up here. Again, don't want to do too much. I think you can sort of see that. This is where we're going to do a bit more with the spatter. You must even leave it a little bit chunkier. So I don't know how much you can see that, but yeah, we're really... Now you know I didn't get too crazy about the rust back here. Ah, look at all that. So let's move this over this way. Again, water this down. And to fix this, I can either put the pigment fixer over the top, like kind of dab it on, brush it on, whatever, or I can also use my dull coat spray. That's something I typically do. So here I'll shoot a few of these onto here. So now we've got our kind of our dried mud. Let's have some fresher looking mud. And to make it even more fresh, we're going to add a little realistic water to that, which I'm going to throw here in one of these little reservoirs. It's actually just a butter container. But you can see I like to use lots of different things. So here we go. We've got some of this. This is going to give it a little bit more of a, I don't want to say a shininess, but it's going to give us more of a wet mud effect. See how that's already darker? Depending on how much of this water effects that I add. I don't necessarily want it to be quite so... So I'm going to change my focus again here, because it's going to be a little closer to the... That's better. It's going to be a little bit closer to the camera. And if I feel it's not... If it's too dark, I've always got my other mud colors that I can bring in. And this is going to go over the top of that. Now keep in mind this is also going to lighten up a little bit. Let's see how now we've got couple of different colors of mud. It's all about that layering. And once I get rid of a little bit, see, I can do this. Push it around like this. Make it a little more subtle. And then here we can have some fresh mud on the underside of this. And I know it looks super different, but don't panic because again it dries lighter. And I actually want a few globs of the fresh mud there. Here we go, and this is sort of the advantage of this method, is that it's going to be dry long before I press stop on the video here. It's going to be completely bone dry. And the paint actually does give it a little bit of holding power. We'll call it that. So again, just mixing the Russian earth and the secret weapons. Not everywhere, but just in some places here. Good. Looks like you can see that. Again, so this is more of the more freshly applied mud here. Just working our way around. Gonna put a little bit here. So to me, this is where the fun is. We've worked on the layering process of this. Been basically setting it up for just this moment here. So again, the fresh mud. Let's add a little more of the water effects to that to lighten it up, make it a little bit on the shiny side. And grab my brush here because I want to feather this a little bit because I think that'll be neat. And over the top of this. It's all about that variance, texture. Now let's get a little bit of this up here. All right. So here where some of the tank crew maybe have used this section right here to climb up onto the top deck to get into the turret. And while I've got it, I think I still have some, yeah. So see, this is more just the powder itself. So I always try to have just the powder with me. And now we're getting kind of a combination of effects here. Now the Pioneer tools on this, I'm not really going to get into that too much. You can just make those metal, whatever. To me, this is really more the important stuff. The stuff that I think is definitely going to be different from what you have normally seen. So here I'm making again another big clump of this fresher mud. The idea is not to put so much of that water effects in here that it looks shiny. It's just supposed to look a wee bit wetter than our dried mud. Just working my way around here. Try not to cover up too much. See, I'm even trying to leave a little bit of the original gray down here. And I always have my other lighter colors handy. So that I can go in and even take some of this and put it over the top. Now you're not really gonna see that area. It's there. I'll throw a little bit onto here too. Just gives it extra, a little more grit, a little more texture. Because keep in mind, this is May/June 1940, and there actually was there was one point I think that the weather did sort of stall things. It kept the Stukas grounded for a bit. So there we have it. Now, while I've got all this out here, I also have some black powder. No pun intended. What I'm gonna do, see if I can find a decent space for this. Okay, I'm gonna throw a little bit here in a container. That's good enough. Now these powders will get messy. Anything they get onto, they're gonna stay on, as far as your clothes or your carpet. So always be aware of that. What we're gonna do is create a little bit of exhaust here. And I clearly need a drier brush for that. That's better. So here where I see some, obviously here you have a little bit of venting. Even potentially a little bit of streaking here. Over the top of that decal. Around your turret ring, and especially over here where you've got your, well, the flam in your Flammpanzer. Boom, like so. And where's our turret here? What I might do is a little bit of on our barrel here. A little bit of dust. So not so much mud. Just maybe some dust, some dirt, especially around the cupola there. Let's get a little more. So you can see how this color of the feathering powder looks a little bit different when it's dry. It has a softer effect. And what I'm going to do now is actually then spatter some of this darker wet mud in some places. So I've got my spatter brush again. I'm going to set up my spatter. So this, again, there's not supposed to be quite as much of it, and I want it to be in bigger chunks here. So it's not really going to be all that noticeable, at least at first. but we'll know it's there. Now, I think there's one final aspect to this I want to show you, and that's getting some leaves on there. And I'll show you what I mean in one little final segment here. So there we've got our quick mud effects again that are basically already dry, and some dust. So next we're going to get to some leaves. So one of the last things I'm going to add here, just to give some more flavor and texture to the vehicle, are basically some dried leaves. What this consists of an actual dried leaf. And we take leaves like this, right here. We press them to make them as flat as we can. And then we'll take some kind of a container here like this. And then you got your leaf cutters here. These are from Green Stuff World. I'm just position them here. And you can see we've punched out some leaves. So I'm going to do a few leaves here. In our neighborhood, we have plenty of sycamore trees and maple trees, and they tend to really shed their leaves almost year-round, which means it gives me an opportunity to get some of these green leaves. So I've got a mixture of green and that. So we've got here's another type of leaf here. I have used painted paper, but that's nowhere near as interesting or as realistic looking as the leaves. I'm just going to throw some of these in here. Don't need dozens of them for just this little thing. I'm going to take this sand and gravel glue. This is from Make Ammo. And what I'm going to do is make sure I don't tip that over. But I'm also going to grab myself just again another one of my brushes. Got some of the sand and gravel glue. Now this is going to be shiny when you first see it. It does not dry shiny. So what I'm going to do is I'll pick up a leaf here. I might even pick up more of a dead leaf there. I got myself a little pile of leaves here. And the idea is, think of where, see here's an area where stuff might collect. There's another area. I might take another different color leaf there to accent that. Not going to put them too much around the turret ring. I found out that's not really the best place to put those, because turret just tends to rip them away. Found that out, yeah, it was a hard lesson learned. Sometimes you have to sort of reposition these things a little bit, jig them around. Let's get some dried leaves here too. So again, this all looks very shiny now, but it will not dry that way. So I definitely want some over here by I believe that's the jack. I think that's the jack. I'm going to throw some leaves back here. Make sure they're just kind of collecting back there, because this is most likely journeying through. If it's in Russia, they don't exactly have super highways there. So yeah, I can get close via the train, but it's still got more ways to go after that. So let's throw a few more of these green leaves on here. Again, trying to think where would they tend to gravitate. Maybe here underneath these Trying to shove one down underneath that tool set there. I don't necessarily want to cover this thing in leaves. But at least get a few out here. You can also, while the sand and gravel glue is drying a bit, that's why we always have tons of these brushes on hand. So let's grab some of this Russian earth here. Sorry to do this off camera. Thought I had some left, but I'm going to take some of this. And scatter some on top of my leaves. It sort of dirties them up a little bit. See that? So that leaf in the back there that's super bright now, it's not quite so bright anymore. I can see these leaves are already starting to stick a little bit. So it's getting more texture. So now I'm going to add some more drops of the fresh mud here. As I say, I have some. Just to make it look like maybe not long ago somebody climbed up on top of this back deck here. So there you go. I can even on the turret here, I always like to have a few leaves and such around the cupola. There's a leaf. A few more leaves. Another one over here. And try and dust on a little bit of this Russian earth here. Again, that's from MiG ammo. And sometimes they're just going to be a pain and not want to stick there. So I'm going to grab me another leaf. Put it over the top there, so it's kind of like a chia tank now. We got some leaves going on there. But we've got ourselves fairly reasonable looking vehicle with some weathering, and it did not take forever. Now I'm gonna take this and do some more things to it, add some more details, pick out some of the rivets, that sort of thing, add some more gray, some lighter gray in areas. But this is going to be serviceable for a game. So I hope this was fun and it gave you some ideas for what you could do with your own vehicles. Thanks again for watching. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel to see more stuff. Again, I've got my battle report videos, lots of painting videos. Gonna add some terrain videos eventually too. So you can check this channel for lots more fun stuff. Thanks again. Bye.